For Easter Sunday, I've chosen this very special painting by Titian, Noli tangere. We know from the Bible that Mary Magdalene has been grieving all night over Christ's death, and as dawn breaks, she sees a figure in the garden that she takes to be a gardener. It's not until this figure speaks to her that she recognizes that it is in fact Jesus Christ, and this is the moment that Titian has chosen to depict in this work. Mary Magdalene recognizes Jesus, drops to her knees and puts out her hand as though to touch him, at which point Jesus just pulls away from her slightly and says, "No, don't touch me." Noli tangere. It seems odd at first that he tells her not to touch him. After all, St. Thomas puts his finger into Christ's wound. But I think what he's saying here is more, you don't need to touch me. I am no longer a physical presence. I will now be with you all the time, but just not in the way that I was before. And then he tells Mary to go and spread the word. So one of the most exquisite things about this work is the body language between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Jesus, at the same time as pulling away from her, just with his bottom half, is leaning towards her. He's almost leaning over her. It's quite a protective gesture. And then his shroud is now tied around his neck, almost like a cape. And this cape billows out to the side of his body, creating an area of darkness that I think really speaks to his immateriality. There is absolutely the sense of a void here, of the fact that he is no longer going to be a physical presence. I'm always struck as well in this painting of the beauty and the delicacy and the calmness of Mary Magdalene. She must have millions of things running through her mind all at this same moment, but yet she is just looking with Christ with wonder and reaching out with one hand whilst the other hand is on her jar of ointment, which reminds us, of course, that she once anointed Christ's feet. And I think of the bond, of the close friendship between Christ and Mary Magdalene. So the focus of this painting is absolutely on this interaction between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. But that isn't to say that the landscape doesn't play an important role. It is decidedly Italianate. Titian was from Venice, and it was commonly thought that if you depicted a landscape that your contemporary audience would recognize, then it brought them closer to the biblical narrative. But here, look at the way in this Italianate landscape, the tree behind Christ and the bush behind Mary Magdalene replicate their poses. So it's almost as though this landscape, that nature has recognized the importance of the encounter taking place here. Perhaps not so the people that are probably still slumbering in this little town to the rear of the painting. Dawn is only just breaking, so I imagine that there are still plenty of people still in bed, as yet unaware of the miracle that has just taken place right on their doorstep. Maybe there's one person that has noticed what's going on. There's an early riser out walking his dog. Who knows whether he has cottoned on to this extraordinary miracle unfolding in front of him. On the other side of the work is a flock of sheep, and nothing is included that isn't necessary certainly in Titian's work. So certainly these sheep just remind us that even in the face of a miracle, everyday life still carries on. But also perhaps it is a reminder of Christ as the sacrificial lamb. More pertinently, perhaps here, it's an evocation of Christ as the Good Shepherd. And if we think of Christ as the Good Shepherd, is it a stretch to think of Mary Magdalene, who is on her knees with this billowing white material of her clothing? Is it a stretch to equate her with one of the sheep in Christ's flock? I don't think so. So this is quite a modestly sized work, but it has a lot going on. However, mostly it is about this fantastic interaction between Christ and Mary Magdalene, and that makes it, I think, one of the most powerful works about the resurrection.
This is such a beautiful painting to arrive at for this Easter Sunday. There's a vibrancy about its colour. There's an energy about the characters that Titian has used. There's new life. There's risen life. What we encounter in what appears to be the garden of the empty tomb is the woman who has come to anoint what she thinks is the dead and lifeless body of the one who has loved her, forgiven her, healed her, made her feel whole, given her back her name, given her back her life. And she has come before anybody else is about, just to do what love demands, to care, to tend, and to look after. But that little pot of ointment is no longer needed, as she encounters one whom she thinks is the gardener. But maybe it's not that narrative that Titian is interested in. I love the way that Mary is on her knees in that sense of worship and adoration, recognizing who Jesus is, only because he calls her by her name. He knows her. And she seems to know, doesn't she, the tones of his voice. She knows that word of love that is spoken. But she's reaching out, wanting to touch. Like Thomas, does she want to sort of make sure it's not a ghost? Or is her hand extended in that desire to caress? He is kind of shifting out of the way, not wanting to be touched. There's an awkwardness about the way Jesus stands. But he is trying to avoid her touch. Do not touch me. Do not cling to me. What I find when I look at the Magdalene is the contrast of colours. It's almost as if she's emerging out of her red. That brilliant whiteness, that dazzlingly bright undergarment speaks of the new life that is emerging out of that blood, out of that death on the cross. And Jesus is there clad in those simple white garments, the shroud that had covered his torn and broken body, but it's a body that doesn't look torn and broken now. There is something of a newness. There is something of an abundance of life in him. Creation itself is part of redemption's story. That making all things new is part of the narrative of the resurrection. There's something life abundant about this painting. And it is a painting that is ebullient with joy. Mary can't get over that the one she had lost is the one that she has now found. She encounters her beloved, and most naturally she wants to touch him, but he has not yet ascended. And we are not to cling to him, but to encounter him in those around us, to see him in the faces of others, to reach out to him in those in need. Christ has no body now, but yours.